My guest is Mark Stewart. He is the Badgers reporter for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, chatting about this Badgers team that's going to get going August 30th to open up the 2024 season, the second year under new head coach Luke Fickell. And Mark, I think the first question is one of the more prominent positions on the roster, and that's quarterback. You've got two guys who've been competing in Tyler Van Dyke and Braedyn Locke. Tyler Van Dyke toward the end of the Platteville sessions, the 2-week getaway worth of practice, sort of started to seize the reins there, and now we're seeing that he has been declared the starting quarterback on day one for the Wisconsin Badgers. Give me your thoughts on the race between them, on what you've seen from those guys. I know Braedyn Locke was pretty disappointed. It seemed like it was a legitimate open competition. Tyler Van Dyke was the transfer brought in from Miami, so you kind of assumed he had a leg up. But give me everything you have thought about that quarterback race.
Well, to start off with, I mean, I don't think in the end it's a surprise that Van Dyke is the starter. I mean, he started for 3+ years at Miami. When you bring a quarterback in from the transfer portal, you're bringing him in for a reason. Wisconsin had all last year to see Braedyn Locke and kind of see where he was at as a player. So the final decision doesn't surprise me. I mean, I do think, not only did they bring Tyler Van Dyke out to talk to the reporters, they brought Braedyn Locke out. I mean, and that's a tough pill to swallow, publicly for, I know he's a quarterback, but even for a young guy. So one, I was impressed with how he handled, that situation, even though he was clearly disappointed. I mean, I think it's a positive that he pushed Van Dyke as much as he did. I mean, I think the key for Braedyn Locke is, are you putting yourself in position so that come December, when Wisconsin looks at its quarterback situation, they're thinking, okay, we're in a good spot. We don't have to go outside the program to find our next starter. So I think that's the key thing as far as Braedyn Locke goes. And as far as Tyler Van Dyke goes, I mean, he's a lot of times, I don't like to get into what star an athlete was. He was a 4-star quarterback. He was highly touted out of high school. He has some of the physical tools that, will allow maybe Wisconsin to be a little more aggressive in the pass game. Maybe he'll be able to fit some balls into places where, that Braedyn, couldn't. And he's been running pretty well. I think, coaches mentioned that Van Dyke lost a few pounds and he's been moving pretty well. So I think that's going to be maybe a surprising piece of his game once the season gets going.
Last year, you got to see Tanner Mordecai, similar situation, a transfer coming in, kind of highly touted. I would say more highly touted even than Tyler Van Dyke. And I think it took a while for everything to gel, whether that was on Tanner Mordecai or the system being introduced or whatever. It took some time before I think we saw the best version of Tanner Mordecai. There was an injury thrown in there as well. I don't know how you feel this might be different, if it is different, because I think obviously the schedule's so tough this year. The foes are so great. They can't afford. There's no runway, right? There's no way that they're, they can afford to be at their best by the end of the year. So does it feel different? Does it seem the same? How would you compare?
For whatever reason, it does feel different. It feels like, and I think this is just about the entire team overall, that, the team we're looking at this year is deeper. It seems on defense, it's more athletic. So overall, you feel better about its prospects. And on an offensive standpoint, it just seems like, the receivers are, a little farther along. Bryson Green, I think, has had a really good camp. And he's a guy that, when you talk about getting the ball downfield, he's an obvious guy. He's about 6'3", he's 215, a good sized guy that, maybe you could take some chances downfield or in the red zone and make things happen. He's had a really good camp. Will Pauling, Wisconsin's leading receiver, he's back. Another really good camp. Trech Kekahuna, who probably is a star of the future, has been playing well. So it just seems like that whole receiver group is farther along this year. And that's definitely going to help the quarterback.
I love Bryson Green. I don't know if you'll see, he's such a deep threat. I don't know if it's going to be like consistent production from him, but I think he could be really special. and Kekahuna. I want to talk a little more about him later because I want to ask about guys that maybe are sort of quote unquote newcomers. That's not really him. He did get some playing time last year, but guys who are going to take a huge leap forward that no one, maybe anybody who watched last year's Badgers team, might not yet know about. But I want to go to another skill position, and that's running back. This is a really interesting one for me too. Ches Malusi is a guy who's back, many injuries. He's just been really snake bitten with injuries. And I don't know if he's 100% healthy. I assume he's pretty close, but whether or not you'll see more of him, or there's transfer Tawee Walker, who's done a lot and really seems to be a type of guy who could be a number one sort of workhorse running back. And then you've got just some really exciting true freshmen, not the least of which is Darian Dupree, but Dylan Jones is there as well. These are guys who are flashing big time. I don't know if there are enough carries to go around for everybody, but it feels like none of those guys are guys that you're going to be able to keep on the sideline the whole season. So I'm curious to know how you see that battle, that shaping up.
Well, as far as, Ches Malusi and Tawee Walker go, I mean, I do think, and I was just working on kind of a, early depth chart, and I kind of had them marked like the quarterbacks where they talk about a 1A and a 1B. I see that with Walker and Ches. I mean, I see both those guys. It's hard to differentiate who has been better. I mean, Walker is when he gets going, especially in the red zone, he's like 5'9", he's like 220, and he's like, a bulldozer. It's just going to be interesting to see him in the red zone. Ches is more, I mean, I think he can do those red zone carries, but I think he's more of a guy that, is might be a little better in space. I think those guys complement each other well. And you talk about carries, it might just be snaps. I mean, you just might see more guys on the field together. You didn't mention Jackson Aker, kid from Verona, and he's had a nice camp, and it's going to be interesting to see how they employ him. It might be a little different than what we saw last year. He's a little bigger. I mean, like he's 6'1", 245. I mean, that's a lot of running back to bring down. It's a deep group. Not to mention Cade Yakamele, who played last year, redshirt sophomore. He's had a good camp. Again, I kind of touched on it before. There are just so many more bodies that you can envision helping them, and those freshmen, I think they're going to force their way on the field somehow. It's going to be interesting to see how that all.
What about on the offensive line? Because if there's an injury situation that I think at least has my attention, it's Riley Mullman, the right tackle, who hasn't been available recently. I know that, they struggled last year, the offensive line. They got a couple key pieces back. Jack Nelson, of course, is the left tackle. He's kind of maybe the spotlighted guy. They lose Tanner Bortolini in the middle, but, they have guys who were here last year who are now on the line. But I would say there's still, in my mind, some concern about whether or not they have the guys and the depth as well to, be able to block for these running backs, to get back to that level of football where Wisconsin teams can run for, close to 200 yards. So what do you see when you see the offensive line, and how concerning is that injury?
Well, they don't really, as it is the case in the college game, they don't really get into
how bad.
They're very vague on injuries. Mm-hmm. Riley did, miss probably, a good week, week and a half. He's been out, he's been at practice. Some days he's been in one of those yellow caution jerseys, and he's gone through walkthrough portions of practice. I mean, I think it sounds like he'll be ready for the season. But as far as depth goes, there's a lot of youth in the depth, which, can be a good thing and a bad thing. Usually if you're playing freshmen, it's not a good thing, but Kevin Haywood, a 6'8", like 325-pound guy, while Riley Mullman was out, was able to get a lot of those first-team snaps. That was good experience for him. Barrett Nelson, who is Jack Nelson's younger brother, redshirt sophomore, he had been out with an injury, and when he came back, he kind of supplanted Haywood and was getting those number one snaps at right tackle with, while Mullman has been out. So, I mean, I think, like I said, since Riley, I believe Riley will be back. that's good experience for those younger guys to get in there and work with those, work with the ones. JP Benchwall. That's kind of a tongue tire. Grafton kid, he's probably their number 6 offensive lineman. So if you had, your 5 starters, JP's probably the next best guy. There is some question there. You want them to stay healthy, but there's a good, potential there as well.
I'm going to kind of use this as a transition from offense to defense. The tight end situation, I think by the end of last year, it was pretty unclear who their playmakers would be this season. If they had any playmakers this season, I know they brought in a guy, Jackson McGowan, in the transfer portal, and he's in the equation. And there are others, but that has been, I think, there haven't been maybe impact guys lately in that group since Jake Ferguson has been gone, maybe even. And then the defensive line is another area that they were also weak at in terms of depth. They're not alone. It was very difficult to even find, there were athletes who left Wisconsin as quality defensive linemen, but guys you wouldn't think of as difference makers ending up at major programs. So they're clearly in demand. Wisconsin is no different. I know Kevin Haywood, one of the true freshmen, has kind of or he's offensive line, isn't he? I guess.
Yeah.
Yep. He's had some decent reps on the offensive line, but defensive line, I know, they've had a couple injuries there too. Either one of those areas concern you, tight end or defensive line, or something that you need to particularly be worried about if you're a Badgers fan?
Well, talking interior defensive line, they did bring in new guys, Brandon Lane, transfer from, I think, Stephen Austin, Elijah Hills, a transfer from Albany. So those are a couple of, FCS type programs. And I do think those guys are going to play and help the depth. So, I mean, I think they're in better shape in the interior line. What's kind of intrigued me a little bit is on the edges on defense, where you've got guys like Aaron Witt, who's been injured. Aaron Witt's, about 6'5", 220 guy. And he, throughout the spring, was one of the top 4, outside linebackers. So, that's one less guy they'll have on the outside that's potentially going to make some plays. But, I mean, again, I look at that group and I think I see, with the addition of Leon Lowry and John Pius, I mean, I think that there's some really nice potential there as well. And then what, the coaches did during camp is they moved Sebastian Cheeks from inside linebacker to outside linebacker. And the guy, what you notice is, like, he's fast. Like, he runs down stuff. He's just like a different body type out there. And he kind of might bring a different skill set. I don't want to go and say, we're going to see Nick Herbig, like we saw a couple years ago where he just was dominant. But I do think there's some really good potential there to be just disruptive. It isn't always the sacks. It's just being disruptive and making your presence felt. And I think this group has that potential. Tight end, I don't know if there's any big play guys there. Riley Nowakowski, Marquette high grad, very dependable, solid. Tucker Ashcraft is a guy that, he's a sophomore, maybe down the road is a guy that could emerge as one of those, big play type tight ends. Played a lot last year as a freshman, and he's probably their best, most well-rounded tight end. Jackson McGowan, you mentioned him, the transfer from LSU, really fast. Like, for a tight end, he's really fast. I think he's going to be he could be a tough matchup for defenses, just because he's not the biggest tight end, but he really moves well and he catches the ball well.
Cool. Yeah, I know Tucker Ashcraft got on the field as a true freshman last year. Kind of surprising, but he's got some experience, even as a guy who, doesn't have many games under his belt. So that's an interesting guy that you mentioned there. Tell me about Jaheim Thomas. His name came up on one of those preseason lists of, like, preseason all conference. The Badgers not well represented on those teams because the depth of the Big Ten is so outrageous, but his name did surface of all the transfer guys and newcomers as somebody who could make a big difference as a linebacker. Is he an X factor that is going to surprise people? Like, how should people interpret what his role is going to be?
I think he's going to have a huge role. I mean, from what I've seen the preseason accolade he received from the Big Ten was well deserved. And he probably, of the looking back at all the transfers that came in, and all the excitement that comes in, when you get different guys, sometimes, the hype and the excitement that you hear and read about a guy, once you see him on the field, doesn't always translate. But with Jaheim, you really see it. He can line up in different areas. I mean, I think he's a guy that's, you can see him on the edge at times, or he can play inside. He's a good sized guy. I think he's going to be a guy that they can move around a lot, so that when they're trying to get their best players on the field, okay, if you might be able to get an extra linebacker on the field because you can put Jaheim somewhere else and he can still make plays and make them at a high level. Obviously he was all SEC last year at Arkansas, and that obviously that's a phenomenal conference. So he's going to be really good. I mean, I guess I don't know how to understate that, but I'm looking for him to have a real big year and to be really immediate impact at a position where, Wisconsin really went into the transfer portal and really tried to make some changes to that linebacker room.
Since we're going around the horn, got to stop in the secondary real quick with Hunter Wohler is back at safety. Of course, Muskego kid who is certainly could have flirted with the NFL draft this offseason, elected not to, elected to come back. So he's one of the, the standouts, I would say, in that secondary. I know they got a lot of depth at cornerback. I'm highly intrigued by this freshman, Xavier Lucas, to know where he fits into the equation. But how does it look at the back end? How do you feel about that one?
Well, you got Ricardo Hallman, who was like a third-team All-American, one of the nation's leaders in interceptions, and he's back. So that bodes well. So you got him and Hunter back, and those two are probably two of your more talented players overall in terms of guys performing at their position well. I think what's going to help is they did add a transfer from Toledo, RJ Delancey, and I think one of the things that overall they're just trying to do is just get more depth. I think Hallman played a lot of snaps last year, and we might see less of him. I think they might have some more depth where they're not going to have to wear a guy like Hallman out throughout the game, so that when they need plays in the fourth quarter, when they need to finish strong, he can be a guy that's out there on the field. So you got that. Preston Zachman's had a really nice camp. He's had like 3 or 4 interceptions at safety. Austin Brown and other safeties had a really strong camp. They're really deep at safety. Kamoy Latu has been banged up most of the camp, but whenever he gets healthy, I can't imagine him. He's going to be another guy that's going to be in the mix. So, I like what they've got there. You mentioned Xavier Lucas. He's a freshman cornerback from, I think he's from Florida, or maybe Philadelphia. So many guys. He was another guy that Fickle's like, well, he might just be so good that we have to figure out a way to use him. Even though that position has more depth this year, he is definitely a freshman that, we might see in the mix. But at cornerback, you also got Jonas DeClona, sophomore, who was backing up Ricardo Hallman last year. So we might see more snaps from him. Jace Arnold's a guy. He's been around for a while. Max Lofi, he was injured, kind of banged up a lot last year. Looks like he's going to be their number 1 nickel corner. So yeah, there's a lot more depth there, and they've been making plays in camp. And if football practice, it's hard for DBs to make plays in camp because a lot of times the quarterback is just there's no pass rush. Obviously, the receivers know where they're going. Quarterbacks got all day to make these throws, and the secondary's been done a nice job of getting in there and getting their hands on balls and even sometimes picking them off.
We've said some of the names of players who could make a difference that are either true freshmen or newcomers. Whose name haven't we said? Who are some names of guys that Badgers fans may not yet be familiar with because they haven't been on the field or have only been on the field very limited amounts? maybe even that is a Duclona or like a Kekahuna, but
Yeah.
who else is going to make plays this year?
Joe Brunner. Joe Brunner's Whitefish Bay high school grad. He's about to he'll be the starter at left guard. And, so you're going to have on the left side, you're going to have Jack Nelson, and you're going to have Joe Brunner, two guys that, football coaches like a little nasty in their players. And both those guys have that. So Joe Brunner is definitely one. Let's see. We mentioned Tretch. I think he's gonna, have a breakout year in terms of just being able to, make some plays there. A guy that just popped in my head is from a receiver standpoint, Vinny Anthony, who got a lot of play on kick return last year, had a really nice spring and summer camp so far. So I think he's a guy that's, got a chance to, help that receiver core and kind of be a playmaker for him. Let's see. We mentioned Lucas, Duclona could, take a step. Linebacker has had a really nice camp. So I think he's a guy at inside linebacker that we're gonna, who was here last year, that's gonna maybe break out a little more.
Who is that guy, by the way? I lost you for a second. The inside linebacker who's gonna make
Christian Allegrio.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Number 28 in your program is what he'll be wearing this year. And then another guy who's made a nice jump at inside linebacker is from last year to this year is Tyler Janzi. He's a guy from Batavia, Illinois. Didn't get played a lot of play last year, but he's been getting a lot of snaps with the ones and twos. He's one of probably the 5 linebackers that are going to play a lot in some capacity.
They play Western Michigan on August 30th. Last year, I remember how excited everyone was for that first Luke Fickell experience, and they got into those first preseason games, and it was just okay, like generously speaking. And then that translated throughout the course of the season. They really struggled when they got into Big Ten play. They're going to struggle in Big Ten play because they're going to face juggernaut after juggernaut. No matter how good they are, it's going to be tough. So what are you looking for, especially early in the season? What is gonna tell you, Mark Stewart, who has seen this team, okay, it's not like last year. It's going to be a team that's improved. No matter what their record says at the end of the year, this is a better football team than it was in 2023.
Well, I mean, start off with, let's go back to what hurt them last year. Slow starts. Let's see how they come out the gates, how they come out the blocks. And there's been a big emphasis this year on having more physical practices, more live contact in practices. And the hope is that will be better tackling. They'll do better at protecting the ball, but they'll also on defense be better at making plays in space. So that's going to be another thing to look out for. And then obviously it's easy to focus on the quarterbacks. But let's see how Tyler Van Dyke and the receiving core, how they come out the gate. Let's see if they can, build some nice momentum going into week 1, and go, see where they can take it.
All right, he is Mark Stewart, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel beat reporter covering the Wisconsin Badgers. Again, August 30th, Camp Randall Stadium, Wisconsin and Western Michigan. It'll kick you off with for the 2024 season. Alabama is going to be in town within a couple weeks, so it's going to be some early tests. They get a couple good, like, ease you into the schedule games before things get really heavy. Thanks for joining us, Mark. We'll chat with you again soon.
All right, thank you.